The fluorescent hospital lights had been my world for 3 months. 3 months of surgeries, physical therapy, and the constant hum of machines. 3 months of my fiancé Marcus promising he'd be there when I got home, that everything would be exactly as I left it. 3 months of believing that the hardest part was behind me. I was wrong. The taxi pulled up to our duplex on Maple Street in Portland at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that would split my life into before and after. My legs still shaky from the accident, I fumbled for my keys, excited to finally sleep in my own bed, to hug my cat Whiskers, to start rebuilding the life that had been put on pause. But there, lined up like soldiers on our front porch, were 7 black trash bags, my clothes spilling out of torn corners, my nursing textbooks scattered on the wet concrete, 3 years of memories reduced to garbage. And taped to our front door was a note that would change everything. Ava, I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Your stuff is outside. I've changed the locks. Don't contact me. Marcus. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Standing there on that porch, rain starting to drizzle on my belongings, I felt something inside me crack. Not break, crack, like the first fissure in ice before it shatters completely. But this crack wasn't destructive. It was the beginning of something I didn't understand yet. The accident had been 3 months ago. A drunk driver ran a red light while I was driving home from my night shift at St. Mary's Hospital. I'd been in my final year of nursing school, so close to graduating, so close to starting the career I'd dreamed about since I was 12 and watched nurses save my grandmother's life. The impact had shattered my left leg in 4 places and damaged my spine. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. I'd spent weeks wondering if lucky was the right word when I couldn't feel my toes and didn't know if I'd ever walk normally again. Marcus had visited every day for the first month. He'd held my hand, brought me flowers, promised we'd get through this together. In sickness and in health, he'd joke, referencing the vows we'd planned to take in 6 months. We'd already put the deposit down on the venue, the historic Cornelius Pass Roadhouse, where we'd had our first date 3 years ago. But something had shifted in month 2. His visits became shorter, his smiles more forced. When I'd talk about coming home, about adapting our life to my new limitations, his eyes would glaze over. He'd change the subject to work, to his promotion at the tech company, to anything but us. He's just processing, my best friend Sarah had said during one of her visits. Some people need time to adjust to big changes. I believed her because I needed to, because the alternative, that the man I'd planned to marry couldn't handle me at my most vulnerable, was too devastating to consider while I was learning to walk again. Now, staring at those trash bags, the alternative was staring me in the face. I called Sarah from my cell phone, my hands choking as much from shock as from the cold rain. "He did what?" She screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "I'm coming over right now. Don't you dare move those bags by yourself." While I waited, I sat on the porch steps, ignoring the dampness seeping through my jeans. I pulled random items from the nearest bag. My favorite scrubs, the ones with tiny cats on them that I'd worn through clinicals, a photo of Marcus and me at the beach last summer, both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember now. My acceptance letter to the nursing program, now water-stained and wrinkled. Mrs. Chen, our elderly neighbor, appeared at her fence line. She'd been watching me through her kitchen window, probably trying to figure out what was happening. "Ava, dear, are you all right?" She called out, her voice thick with concern and her usual Chinese accent. I looked up at this woman who'd lived next door for the past 2 years, who'd always waved when I left for classes or work, who'd brought me homemade soup when I had the flu last winter. In that moment, she seemed to care more about my well-being than the man I'd planned to spend my life with. "I'm fine, Mrs. Chen," I lied, waving weakly. "Just some changes." She studied me for a long moment, then disappeared into her house. 10 minutes later, she returned with a thermos of hot tea and an umbrella. "You sit in the rain, you get sick," she said matter-of-factly, holding the umbrella over both of us as she handed me the tea. "Men, they sometimes very stupid, but you are strong girl. I see you every day working hard, studying hard. This," she gestured at the bags, "this is not the end of your story." Her words hit me harder than Marcus's note had. Here was someone who barely knew me, yet saw something in me that my own fiancé apparently couldn't see. Sarah arrived 20 minutes later, her Honda Civic screeching to a stop in the driveway. She took one look at the scene and started cursing in both English and Spanish, a sure sign she was beyond angry. "That coward," she spat, grabbing the nearest trash bag. 3 years, Ava! 3 years you supported him through his career change, through his mother's death, through his anxiety about the promotion, and the second you need him, he bails?" We loaded the bags in her car, Mrs. Chen helping despite our protests. As we worked, Sarah filled me in on what she'd suspected but hadn't wanted to tell me while I was in the hospital. "Jessica Morrison from his office has been posting photos of them at restaurants. Group photos," she claimed, but Sarah's voice trailed off as she showed me her phone. There was Marcus, his arm around a tall blonde, both of them laughing at some corporate happy hour event. The timestamp showed it was from 2 weeks ago. The crack inside me widened, but instead of pain, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The doubt I'd been carrying, the sense that something was wrong but not being able to name it, that weight was lifting. "Where will you stay?" Mrs. Chen asked as we finished loading the last bag. I looked at Sarah, who was already nodding before I could ask. "My place, for as long as you need." But as we drove away from Maple Street, I found myself thinking not about where I would sleep tonight, but about Mrs. Chen's words. "This is not the end of your story." For 3 months, I'd been thinking about getting back to my old life, back to school, back to Marcus, back to the plan we'd made together. But sitting in Sarah's passenger seat, surrounded by trash bags full of my former life, I realized something profound. I didn't want my old life back. My old life had included a man who would abandon me when things got difficult. My old life had been built around someone else's dreams as much as my own. My old life had been smaller than I was. The accident had taken my mobility, my sense of security, my faith in my own body. Marcus had taken my trust, my future plans, my belief that love was unconditional. But as we pulled into Sarah's driveway, I realized they'd also given me something. A blank slate. For the first time in years, I could choose my path based solely on what I wanted, what I needed, what would make me whole. The rain had stopped, and through the windshield, I could see the sun breaking through the clouds. Not a rainbow, life isn't a movie, but enough light to see the road ahead clearly. "You know what the crazy thing is?" I said to Sarah as we sat in her driveway. "What?" "I think this might be exactly what I needed." She looked at me like I'd suffered a head injury along with everything else. "Ava, your fiancé just threw you out like garbage." "No," I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "He just gave me back my life." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sarah's apartment smelled like vanilla candles and the lavender detergent she'd always been obsessed with. It was a studio in the trendy Pearl District, barely 500 square feet, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the chaos of the past few hours. She'd cleared out half her closet without me even asking, pushing her designer dresses to one side to make room for my wrinkled scrubs and casual clothes. "I'll take the couch," she insisted, even though I'd protested. "You need the bed while you're still recovering." That first night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of downtown Portland through her thin walls. Car horns, late-night conversations from the street below, the distant rumble of the Max light rail. For 3 months, I dreamed of sleeping somewhere other than a hospital bed. Now I had my wish, just not the way I'd imagined it. Around 3 a.m., I heard Sarah's phone buzzing on the coffee table. She answered it groggily. "Hello? Marcus? Are you kidding me right now?" Her voice went from sleepy to furious in seconds.
No, you cannot talk to her. No, she doesn't want to work things out. You literally put her belongings in trash bags. I sat up in bed. Sarah, it's okay. Give me the phone. Ava, you don't have to. Give me the phone. Marcus's voice was slurred, probably from drinking. Ava, baby, I'm sorry. I panicked, okay? Seeing you like that in the hospital, it scared me. I didn't know how to handle it. So you decided not to handle it at all? I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It doesn't have to be over. We can figure this out. I love you. 6 hours ago, those 3 words might have made me cry. Now they just made me tired. Marcus, you changed the locks. You threw away 3 years of our relationship along with my clothes. You've been seeing Jessica Morrison for weeks while I was learning to walk again. Don't insult both of us by pretending this is about panic. The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. I saw the photos. Sarah showed me. You look happy with her, happier than you ever looked visiting me. Ava, she's just a friend from work. Stop. The word came out harder than I intended. Just stop. We're done, Marcus. We were done the moment you decided I was too broken to love. I hung up and turned off the phone. Sarah was staring at me from the couch, her eyes wide. Damn, she said. That was actually kind of badass. I laughed, surprising both of us. It felt badass. The next morning brought new challenges. I needed to figure out school, health insurance, where I was going to live long-term. The nursing program had put me on medical leave, but my advisor, Professor Williams, had called to check on my progress. The good news is you can re-enter the program next semester. Your clinical hours will transfer and your GPA is solid. But Ava, I have to ask, are you sure you're ready? Nursing is physically demanding even under normal circumstances. It was a fair question. My left leg still ached when I walked too far. I had to use a cane sometimes, especially when I was tired. The career I dreamed of required 12-hour shifts on my feet, lifting patients, responding to emergencies. I need to think about it, I admitted. After I hung up, Sarah made us coffee and sat across from me at her tiny kitchen table. Okay, real talk time, she said. What do you actually want to do? Not what you planned before the accident, not what Marcus expected, not what anyone else thinks you should do. What does Ava want? I stared into my coffee mug, watching the steam rise. I don't know anymore. I used to be so certain about everything. Nursing school, marrying Marcus, buying a house in the suburbs, having kids by 30. I had this whole timeline mapped out. And now I feel like I'm starting from scratch, like I'm 24 years old and have no idea who I am or what I want. Sarah grinned. That's not a problem, Ava. That's freedom. Later that day, she dragged me to a coffee shop called Stumptown in the Alberta Arts District. She insisted I get out of the apartment. Fresh air, people watching, actual sunlight. The neighborhood was different from where Marcus and I had lived. More diverse, more artistic. Murals covered building walls, street musicians played on corners, and the energy felt more alive somehow, less predictable.
While Sarah ordered our drinks, I found a table by the window and watched people walk by. A woman with purple hair pushing a stroller while talking animatedly on her phone. An elderly man in a paint-splattered apron watering plants outside what looked like an art studio. A young couple sharing a pastry, both of them laughing at something on their shared tablet. "You're people watching," Sarah observed, setting my latte in front of me. "Yeah, I'm trying to imagine their stories. Like, what do they do for work? Are they happy? What keeps them up at night? That's very anthropological of you." I laughed. Remember in college when I couldn't decide between nursing and social work? I almost double majored. You were fascinated by people's stories. You still are. As if summoned by our conversation, an older woman approached our table. She was maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back in a messy bun and wearing a flowing dress that looked like it came from a vintage shop. "Excuse me," she said, her voice warm but confident. "I couldn't help but notice your cane. I hope you don't mind me asking, but Are you dealing with a recent injury? I tensed, expecting pity or unwanted medical advice, but her expression was curious, not sympathetic. Car accident a few months ago, I said carefully. I ask because I run a support group for people navigating major life transitions. We meet every Thursday evening at the community center on Fremont. It's not just for people with injuries. We have folks dealing with career changes, relationship endings, health issues, all kinds of transitions. She handed me a business card. I'm Dr. Rebecca Torres. I'm a therapist, but the group isn't therapy exactly. It's more like community. People sharing stories, supporting each other through change. After she left, I stared at the card. Life Transitions Support Group was printed in simple font with meeting times and an address. Are you going to go? Sarah asked. I don't know. I've never been much of a group therapy person. She said it wasn't therapy. Still. But as we walked back to Sarah's apartment, I found myself thinking about Dr. Torres's words. Major life transitions. That's exactly what I was going through, wasn't it? Not just dealing with an injury or a breakup, but fundamentally changing direction. That evening, I called my parents in Seattle. I'd been putting off this conversation, not wanting to worry them while I was still processing everything myself. Oh, honey, my mom said when I told her about Marcus, I'm so sorry. But honestly, I never thought he was good enough for you. Mom, you never said anything. You seemed happy. That's all I cared about. But Ava, the way he acted when you were in the hospital, your father and I were concerned. What do you mean? He seemed more focused on how your situation affected him than on helping you heal. When we visited, he kept talking about how hard it was for him, how stressful, how he didn't know if he could handle the pressure. I felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. Even my parents had seen what I'd been too close to notice. What are you going to do now? My dad asked, taking the phone. I'm figuring it out. Maybe going back to school, maybe not. I'm thinking about trying some new things first. Good, he said, surprising me. You're young, you're smart, and you've got time to explore. Maybe this is exactly what you needed, a chance to build a life that's completely yours. After we hung up, I lay in Sarah's bed thinking about the day, the conversation with Dr. Torres, my parents' unexpected support, the way I'd felt walking through the Alberta neighborhood, curious, energized, like I was seeing possibilities instead of limitations. I pulled out Dr. Torres's business card and set it on the nightstand where I could see it. Thursday was 3 days away. For the first time since leaving the hospital, I felt something I hadn't expected. Anticipation, not for returning to my old life, but for discovering what my new one might look like. The rain had started again, pattering against the window, but instead of feeling trapped, I felt like something was washing clean, making room for whatever came next.
Thursday evening arrived with the kind of October chill that makes Portland feel like autumn is settling in for real. I stood outside the Fremont Community Center for 10 minutes, watching people file through the glass doors, second-guessing my decision to come. My cane felt heavier than usual, and I kept adjusting my jacket, wondering if I looked too put together or not put together enough. Sarah had offered to come with me, but something told me this was something I needed to do alone. Still, her words echoed in my head. The worst that can happen is you leave early. The best that can happen might change everything. The community center smelled like old coffee and floor wax. Signs pointed toward various rooms: yoga for seniors, ESL classes, Room B, Life Transitions Group. I followed the arrows down a hallway lined with bulletin boards covered in flyers for everything from dog walking services to guitar lessons. Room B was smaller than I'd expected, with about 15 folding chairs arranged in a loose circle. Maybe 8 people were already seated, ranging in age from what looked like early 30s to 70s. Dr. Torres spotted me immediately and waved me over. "Ava, I'm so glad you decided to come." She gestured toward an empty chair. "We're just getting started." The group was more diverse than I had anticipated. There was Miguel, a chef whose restaurant had closed during the pandemic and who was now driving for DoorDash while figuring out his next move. Janet, whose husband of 35 years had died 6 months ago, leaving her to navigate widowhood in a house that suddenly felt enormous.
Kevin, a former software engineer who'd quit his six-figure job to become a middle school teacher and was questioning everything about the decision. The rule here, Dr. Torres explained after introductions, is that you share what you want to share when you want to share it. No pressure, no judgment. We're all here because we're in some kind of transition, and transitions are messy and nonlinear and sometimes terrifying. For the first meeting, I mostly listened, but something about the honesty in that room, people talking about fear and uncertainty without trying to fix each other or offer solutions, felt like oxygen after holding my breath for months. After the meeting, Miguel approached me in the parking lot. "First time?" he asked, lighting a cigarette. "That obvious?" He laughed. "You had that deer in the headlights look I remember having. But you stayed the whole time, which is something. Half the people who come to their first meeting bolt after 20 minutes. Did you want to bolt?" Every week for the first month. But Dr. Torres has this way of making you feel like whatever weird place you're in is exactly where you need to be right now. As I drove back to Sarah's apartment, I found myself thinking about Kevin's story. He'd made a huge career change, taken a massive pay cut, and was now dealing with the reality that middle schoolers were way harder to manage than code. But when he talked about the moment a struggling student finally grasped a math concept, his whole face lit up. I don't know if I made the right choice, but I know I made a choice that feels like mine. That phrase stuck with me. A choice that feels like mine. Over the weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a list of things I was genuinely curious about. Not career paths or practical considerations, just things that made me lean forward with interest. The list surprised me. How people rebuild their lives after major losses, what makes some neighborhoods feel like communities while others feel like collections of strangers, whether there are jobs that involve helping people tell their stories, how to make a small space feel like home, and what it takes to start something from scratch. Sarah found the list on Monday morning while I was in the shower. "This is an interesting list," she said when I emerged, holding up the paper. "None of these have anything to do with nursing." "I know. Are you okay with that?" I considered the question. I think I am. I think I chose nursing partly because it felt safe, and partly because Marcus's mother was a nurse, and he always talked about how noble it was. But looking at this list, I think what I really want is to help people, just maybe in a different way. That afternoon, I did something impulsive. I walked to the University of Portland campus, about a mile from Sarah's apartment. The walk took longer than it used to, and I had to rest twice, but something about moving through the world under my own power felt important.
"I'm interested in learning about your social work program," I told the woman at the information desk. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Dr. Amanda Chen, no relation to my former neighbor, who directed the Master of Social Work program. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with an easy smile and the kind of energy that suggested she genuinely loved what she did. "Tell me what draws you to social work," she said after I'd given her the basic overview of my situation. "I think I want to help people navigate transitions," I heard myself say. "Major life changes, crises, starting over. I went through something recently that made me realize how little support there is for people who are rebuilding their lives." Dr. Chen nodded. "That's a huge area of need. Are you familiar with crisis intervention, community organizing, policy work?" I wasn't, but as she described different specializations within social work, something clicked. What about something that combines direct service with community building, like helping individuals but also working on systemic issues? Her eyes lit up. Community social work. It's exactly what you're describing. You work with individuals and families, but you also focus on strengthening neighborhoods, advocating for policy changes, building networks of support. She handed me a packet of information. The application deadline for next fall is in February. The program is 2 years, and we have partnerships with agencies all over the city for field placements. Walking back to Sarah's apartment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Excitement about the future. Not the nervous excitement of following someone else's plan, but the deep, steady excitement of moving towards something that felt authentically mine. That evening at group, I shared for the first time. "I'm Ava," I began, surprised by how steady my voice sounded.
3 months ago, I was in a car accident that changed a lot of things physically. But last week, I came home from the hospital to find my fiancé had left me and thrown my belongings in trash bags. A few people winced in recognition. Janet reached over and squeezed my hand. At first, I thought this was the worst thing that could happen to me, but I'm starting to think it might be the best thing. I spent 3 years planning a life around someone else's dreams in a career I chose for reasons that had more to do with safety than passion. Now I get to choose what comes next. I told them about visiting the university, about the social work program, about the strange feeling of discovering interests I didn't know I had. The scary part, I continued, is that I'm committing to something completely different from what I planned. I'm 24, I'm living on my friend's couch, and I'm about to start over in a field I know almost nothing about. But for the first time in years, I feel like I'm moving towards something instead of just following a path someone else laid out. After the meeting, Dr. Torres pulled me aside. "That was brave," she said. "Sharing for the first time is always difficult, but you went deeper than most people do even after months in group." It felt important to say it out loud, to commit to it publicly. That's exactly what it was, a commitment, not just to a new career path, but to trusting yourself to build a life that reflects who you actually are. Walking to my car, I realized she was right. I'd made a commitment, not just to apply to graduate school, but to stop living my life according to other people's expectations and start building something authentically mine. The October air was crisp, and downtown Portland stretched out below me, full of lights and possibilities. For the first time since the accident, I felt like the protagonist of my own story instead of a supporting character in someone else's. I had work to do, applications to complete, financial aid to figure out, a life to rebuild. But as I drove through the city that was starting to feel like home in a way it never had before, I felt ready for the challenge. I was all in.
November arrived with the kind of relentless Portland rain that makes everything feel urgent and cozy at the same time. I'd been living with Sarah for 6 weeks, and while she insisted she loved having me around, I could see the strain starting to show. Her dates now happened at his place instead of hers. She'd started doing yoga at the studio instead of in the living room. We were both pretending the arrangement was sustainable, but we both knew it wasn't. The graduate school application was due in February, which gave me 3 months to pull together transcripts, personal statements, and recommendation letters. But first, I needed to figure out how to support myself in the meantime. My savings from nursing school were nearly gone, and I couldn't keep freeloading off Sarah indefinitely. "You could always go back to the hospital," Sarah suggested over breakfast one Tuesday morning. "They probably take you back as a tech or something while you figure things out." The thought of those fluorescent corridors made my chest tight. I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Okay, so what else? Retail? Food service? I'd been thinking about the same question for days. My degree was in pre-nursing, which was essentially just general education requirements. I had some experience as a certified nursing assistant from my training, but the physical demands felt overwhelming given my current limitations. I needed something that would pay enough for me to get my own place, but flexible enough for me to work on applications and maybe take some prerequisite courses. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen called me that Wednesday. I had given her my number when Sarah and I picked up a few more of my belongings from the house. Marcus had actually left some boxes in the garage that contained important documents and a few sentimental items. "Ava, dear, I have proposition for you," she said in her direct way. "My daughter Linda, she needs help with her business. You remember Linda?" I vaguely remembered meeting a woman in her 40s during one of my visits with Mrs. Chen. Something about event planning. She does weddings, corporate events, that kind of thing. Very busy, but she needs someone who can write well, talk to people, help with organization, part-time to start, but could become more. You interested? The timing felt like the universe aligning. Can I talk to her? Linda Chan Morrison turned out to be nothing like her soft-spoken mother. She was a force of nature in designer jeans and statement jewelry, running her event planning business out of a converted warehouse space in the industrial district.
When I met her the next day, she was simultaneously coordinating a corporate holiday party for 300 people while texting a bride about centerpiece disasters. Mom says you're smart, reliable, and need work. Those are my 3 favorite qualities in humans. Can you write? Actually write, not just text messages and Instagram captions. I can write, I thought, thinking of all the nursing care plans and research papers I had crafted over the past few years. Can you talk to stressed out people without losing your mind? I thought about my clinical rotations, dealing with anxious patients and demanding families. Yes. Can you learn fast and work weird hours? Absolutely. She finally looked up at me, taking in my appearance with the calculating gaze of someone who sized up people for a living. You're recovering from something medical. Car accident? I tensed, waiting for the questions about limitations and accommodations. Instead, she nodded approvingly. Good. People who've been through real stuff have perspective. Half my clients are freaking out because the napkins are ivory instead of cream. Meanwhile, you know what actual problems look like. She offered me $25 an hour to start, working 20 to 30 hours a week depending on event schedules. The job would involve client communications, vendor coordination, and helping manage events. It wasn't glamorous, but it was more money than I'd ever made, and it would give me enough to find my own place while still having time for applications and maybe take some prerequisite courses. When can you start? Linda asked. Tomorrow? Perfect. We have a wedding this Saturday that's been a complete disaster from day one. Excellent trial by fire. Saturday morning, I found myself at the Left Bank Annex, a trendy venue in the Pearl District, at 6 a.m. The bride, Catherine, was marrying her longtime girlfriend, Emma, in what was supposed to be an intimate ceremony for 50 guests. Instead, it had turned into a logistical nightmare involving 2 divorced sets of parents, a last-minute venue change, and a florist who had apparently disappeared with the deposit. The flowers were supposed to be here an hour ago, Catherine said, pacing in her road while the hairstylist tried to pin her veil. Linda promised me everything would be perfect, and now Emma's going to walk down the aisle to grocery store roses. I'd spent the previous day learning about the situation from Linda, who was managing 3 other events that weekend and couldn't be on site for the whole day. This was my chance to prove I could handle client relations under pressure. Catherine, I need you to take a deep breath, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. I know this feels like everything is falling apart, but I promise we're going to fix this. Emma is going to have the wedding she deserves.
While Catherine got her makeup done, I worked the phones. The original florist was indeed unreachable, but I found a wholesale flower market that opened at 7 a.m. By 8:30, I was loading my rental car with white roses, eucalyptus, and baby's breath, texting YouTube tutorials to Emma's sister, who'd volunteered to help with arrangements. The next crisis came at 10 a.m. The officiant called in sick with food poisoning. Oregon law required either an ordained minister or a judge to perform the ceremony, and we had 2 hours to find someone. I called every wedding officiant in Linda's vendor database. No luck. Saturday afternoon bookings were impossible to fill last minute. Then I remembered something from my group therapy sessions. Dr. Torres had mentioned being ordained online to officiate her brother's wedding years ago. It was a long shot, but I called her anyway. Ava, everything okay? I know this is crazy, but are you still legally able to officiate weddings? And if so, any chance you're free this afternoon to help save a lesbian wedding? She laughed. You know what? I'll be there in an hour. By 2 p.m., when guests started arriving, we'd pulled it together. The flowers weren't exactly what Catherine had envisioned, but they were beautiful. Dr. Torres arrived in a navy dress and sensible shoes, looking every bit the professional officiant. The catering was on schedule, the music was working, and both brides looked radiant. I spent the ceremony standing at the back of the room with my clipboard, watching for problems that never materialized. But more than that, I was watching the faces of the guests as Catherine and Emma exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Watching Emma's grandmother dab her eyes with tissues, watching Catherine's father, who'd initially opposed the marriage, beam with pride as he walked his daughter down the aisle. During the reception, Catherine found me restocking the dessert table. She said, "I owe you an apology and a huge thank you. This morning I thought you were too young to handle a crisis this big,
but you saved our wedding." "I just made some phone calls." "No, you did more than that. You stayed calm when I was losing my mind. You found solutions instead of excuses. You made me feel like everything was going to be okay, even when it clearly wasn't." Driving home that evening, exhausted but exhilarated, I realized something had shifted. For months, I'd felt like I was recovering from things that had happened to me. The accident, Marcus leaving, my plans falling apart. But today, I'd been the person making things happen. Linda called me Sunday morning. "Catherine's already emailed me twice about how amazing you were yesterday. Plus, Dr. Torres, who I'm definitely adding to our officiant list, told me you handled everything like a seasoned professional." It felt good to be useful. More than useful. You were exactly what that situation needed, which is why I want to talk to you about something bigger. We met for coffee Monday morning at a place called Kova in the Hawthorne district. Linda laid out a proposal that was bigger than I'd expected. She said, "I want to expand the business, not just more events, but a different kind of service. Crisis management for life events. Weddings, baby showers, anniversary parties, even funeral receptions. All the times when people are emotional and overwhelmed and need someone who can think clearly and solve problems." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with the kind of energy that successful entrepreneurs radiate. "I think you could be perfect for this. You've got the people skills, you can write, you stay calm under pressure, and you understand what it feels like when life doesn't go according to plan. Plus, you're young enough that clients will feel like they're getting fresh perspective, but you've been through enough that they'll trust you to handle real problems. The position would be full-time with benefits, making enough money that I could not only get my own apartment, but actually save for graduate school. It would also mean delaying my MSW application by a year." She said, "I know it's not social work, but think about it. You'd be helping people through some of the most important and stressful moments of their lives. Isn't that what drew you to helping professions in the first place?" Walking home from the coffee shop, I felt the familiar sensation of standing at a crossroads. 6 months ago, my path had seemed so clear. Now I was choosing between immediate financial stability, doing work I'd discovered I was good at, versus waiting another year to pursue the graduate degree that would let me do the community work I thought I wanted. But as I turned onto Sarah's street, I realized something important. I wasn't choosing between a right path and a wrong path. I was choosing between two different versions of helping people, two different ways of building a life that felt authentically mine. For the first time in months, having options felt like abundance rather than confusion.
I said yes to Linda's offer. The decision felt right in the moment. The financial security, the chance to help people during meaningful life events, the opportunity to build something new. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in the Belmont district in December, a cozy space above a vintage bookstore with hardwood floors and windows that let in actual sunlight. For the first time in months, I had my own space, my own routine, my own life. The work was everything Linda had promised. Corporate holiday parties where I diffused vendor conflicts and family drama. A New Year's Eve wedding where the groom's ex-girlfriend showed up uninvited and I somehow convinced her to leave peacefully. A surprise anniversary party where I coordinated with adult children scattered across 3 time zones to pull off the perfect celebration for their immigrant parents. I was good at it, really good. Clients started requesting me specifically. Linda gave me a raise in February and started talking about making me a full partner within 2 years. I had health insurance, a 401k, and enough money to buy furniture that wasn't from Goodwill. But as winter stretched into spring, something started gnawing at me. It began with small moments of disconnection. Standing in the back of a $50,000 wedding, watching a bride have a meltdown because the champagne flutes had water spots, while knowing that the same money could fund a community center for a year. Spending hours crafting the perfect corporate event for a tech company's product launch while reading news about homelessness increasing in Portland. The work was meaningful to the clients, but I started questioning whether it was meaningful to me. The breaking point came in April, during what should have been one of our biggest successes. We were coordinating a 3-day corporate retreat for a pharmaceutical company at a luxury resort in the Columbia River Gorge. Everything was perfect. Catered meals from a James Beard award-winning chef, team-building activities led by Olympic athletes, accommodations that cost more per night than most people made in a week. On the second day, while I was troubleshooting a minor issue with the AV equipment, I overheard a conversation between two executives. "The new insulin pricing is going to boost quarterly profits by at least 12%, one said, adjusting his golf clubs. "Good thing, my kid's private school tuition just went up again." They were talking about raising prices on medication that people needed to survive, treating it like any other business decision. I stood there holding my clipboard, surrounded by luxury and excess, listening to them discuss pricing out diabetics like they were talking about the weather. That night, I called Sarah from my hotel room. "I think I made a mistake," I said without preamble. "What kind of mistake?" "This job, this whole direction. I thought I was helping people, but I'm just facilitating rich people's parties while pretending it matters." "Ava, you've been working there 4 months. You just got a raise. You have your own apartment. Things are going well." "But are they going well towards something I actually care about?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You know what this sounds like? It sounds like you're ready to apply to social work school. The deadline was in February. I missed it. So you apply for the following year, or you find another program, or you figure out a different path entirely. Ava, you're 25 years old. You don't have to have everything figured out right now." But the truth was, I felt like I had already figured it out once and then abandoned it for the security of a steady paycheck. The graduate school applications I had never submitted were still saved on my laptop. Personal statements about wanting to work with underserved communities and create systemic change that now felt like evidence of who I really was underneath all the event planning success. When I got back to Portland, I tried to recapture my enthusiasm for the work. I told myself that helping people celebrate important moments was valuable, that not every job had to save the world, that financial stability was worth something. But the feeling of misalignment only grew stronger. In May, we coordinated a charity gala for a nonprofit that claimed to serve homeless families. I spent weeks organizing a $500 per plate dinner at a downtown hotel, complete with a live auction featuring luxury vacation packages and designer handbags. The event raised $200,000, which sounded impressive, until I realized that after the venue costs, catering, entertainment, and our fee, less than $80,000 would actually reach the families the organization served. I started calculating how much direct support that same $200,000 could provide if given directly to families. Rent assistance, job training, childcare, transportation. The math was depressing. "You're becoming cynical," Linda observed during our monthly check-in. "It's not attractive on you." "I'm not cynical. I'm just questioning whether what we're doing actually helps people or just makes wealthy people feel good about helping people." "Does it matter? We're running a business, not a revolution." That phrase haunted me for weeks. We're running a business, not a revolution. It crystallized everything that felt wrong about my current path. I didn't want to run a business. I wanted to be part of a revolution. Small-scale, community-level change that actually improved people's lives. The final straw came in June. We were hired to coordinate a poverty simulation corporate team-building event for a group of marketing executives. The idea was that employees would spend 4 hours role-playing as low-income families, navigating scenarios like finding childcare on minimum wage or accessing healthcare without insurance. "It's supposed to build empathy," the HR director explained during our planning meeting, "help our team understand the challenges our customers face." I spent 2 weeks creating realistic scenarios based on actual case studies from local social service agencies. Families evicted because of medical debt, single mothers choosing between rent and prescription medications, elderly people rationing insulin because Medicare didn't cover the full cost.
The event was held at the company's sleek downtown offices, with stations set up to simulate different aspects of poverty. A grocery store where participants had to feed a family of 4 on $30, a housing office where they competed for scarce affordable units, and a healthcare clinic with long waits and impossible forms. For 4 hours, I watched executives laugh and joke as they played at being poor. They turned systemic failures into competitive games, treating housing insecurity like a scavenger hunt and food insecurity like a puzzle to solve. "This is so eye-opening," one participant told me during the debrief. "I had no idea being poor was so complicated. Makes me appreciate what I have." Then they all went back to their 6-figure salaries and stock options, feeling good about their newfound awareness, while the actual poor families I'd based the scenarios on continued struggling with the real versions of the problems they'd just gamified. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the laptop screen, scrolling through social work programs with application deadlines I'd already missed. The University of Portland program wouldn't accept new applications until the following February. Portland State had a rolling admissions process, but the earliest I could start would be the following fall. A year felt like forever when every day at work felt like moving further away from who I wanted to be. I called Dr. Torres, hoping our conversation after group the previous week meant I could reach out with questions. "I feel stuck. I have a good job that pays well, but I feel like I'm betraying my own values every day I stay, but I also can't afford to quit without something lined up, and I've missed all the application deadlines for what I actually want to do. What would happen if you quit tomorrow?" "I'd run out of money in about 3 months. I'd probably have to move back in with Sarah or my parents. I'd feel like a failure." "And what happens if you stay?" The question hit me like cold water. I become someone I don't recognize. I get really good at facilitating other people's excess while telling myself it's meaningful work. Those are both real consequences, but only one of them is irreversible. After we hung up, I sat with that observation for a long time. Financial setbacks were temporary. Compromising my integrity might not be. But knowing what I needed to do and having the courage to do it were 2 different things entirely.
The answer came from the most unexpected place, a conversation with Mrs. Chen over her backyard fence. I'd started visiting her every few weeks, partly out of gratitude for connecting me with Linda, but mostly because her practical wisdom and homemade tea had become a source of comfort during my growing work frustrations. On a warm Saturday afternoon in July, I found her tending to her vegetable garden, muttering in Mandarin at what appeared to be aphids on her tomato plants. "Ava, perfect timing," she said, straightening up with a smile. "I need someone with young eyes to help me see these tiny bugs." We spent an hour working in her garden, and I found myself telling her about my dissatisfaction with the event planning work. Unlike my conversations with Sarah or Dr. Torres, which focused on feelings and long-term goals, Mrs. Chen approached my problem with characteristic directness. "You want to help people, but current job helps wrong people," she summarized, deadheading some marigolds. "So why not help right people in your free time?" "What do you mean?" "You have skills now, organizing, problem-solving, talking to difficult people. You know how to make things happen. Why not make things happen for people who actually need help?" She told me about her friend Rosa Martinez, who ran a community center in the Jade District, Portland's Asian immigrant neighborhood. Rosa always complaining about grants, fundraising, trying to keep programs running with no money. Maybe you could help her with events, but events that actually matter. That Monday, I called Rosa. Her voice was tired but warm, with the slight accent of someone who'd learned English as an adult but spoke it with complete confidence. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you might have some ideas about fundraising," she said. "I have to be honest, we've tried everything. Bake sales, car washes, applying for grants we never get. We're 3 months behind on rent, and if we can't catch up, we'll have to close." The Jade District Community Center occupied the bottom floor of an aging strip mall,
squeezed between a Vietnamese grocery store and a tax preparation office. When I visited that Wednesday evening, the space was buzzing with activity, despite its obvious financial constraints. Elderly Chinese immigrants were taking an English conversation class in one corner, while teenagers worked on homework at mismatched tables. A cooking class was happening in the tiny kitchen, filling the space with the smell of garlic and ginger. Rosa was maybe 50, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of energy that suggested she ran on coffee and determination. She showed me around with obvious pride, despite the peeling paint and outdated furniture. "We serve about 300 families," she explained as we walked. "English classes, citizenship, test prep, job placement assistance, after-school programs for kids whose parents work multiple jobs. The rent is only $3,200 a month, which is nothing for this neighborhood, but when you're operating on donations and small grants—" She trailed off, gesturing helplessly at a stack of past-due notices. "What's the biggest fundraising event you've ever done?" I asked. "We had a silent auction 3 years ago that raised about $8,000, but that was before COVID, when more people had disposable income." I looked around the space, already calculating possibilities. What if we could raise enough to cover a full year's rent? Not just catch up, but get ahead. Rosa's laugh was tired. "That would be $38,400. Ava, these are immigrant families. Most of them are working minimum wage jobs. They donate what they can, but what if we weren't just asking immigrant families? What if we created an event that brought the whole city together?" That night, I went home and did something I hadn't done since my nursing school days. I stayed up until 3 a.m. working on a project that excited me. Not because someone was paying me, but because I could see how it might actually matter. The idea was ambitious, but simple. A multicultural food and arts festival that would showcase the incredible diversity of Portland's immigrant communities while raising money for the community center. Instead of the typical charity gala model, wealthy people paying high prices to feel good about helping, we'd create something that was genuinely valuable to everyone involved. I spent the next 2 weeks developing a detailed proposal. Food vendors from different immigrant communities would keep 70% of their sales while contributing 30% to the center. Local artists, musicians, and performers would have a platform to showcase their work. Community organizations could set up information booths. Kids would have activities while parents enjoyed music and food. The venue would be Pioneer Courthouse Square, Portland's living room, which could be reserved for community events. The city would waive fees for nonprofit fundraisers if we could demonstrate community benefit. Local media would likely cover it because Portland loved stories about diversity and community cooperation. Most importantly, it would cost almost nothing to organize. No expensive catering, no luxury auction items, no hotel ballroom rental, just coordination, permits, and marketing. When I presented the idea to Rosa, her initial skepticism gave way to cautious excitement. "You really think we could raise that much money with food trucks and folk dancing? I think we could raise more than that. But Rosa, I need to be honest with you. I have a full-time job that I'm reconsidering. I could organize this festival, but I'd need to do it as a volunteer. And if it works, if we actually pull this off, I might want to talk to you about other ways I could help the center." She studied my face. "Are you thinking about quitting your job?" "I'm thinking about doing work that matters to me." "And you think this would matter to you?" I looked around the community center, at the teenagers getting homework help, at the elderly man practicing English phrases with a volunteer tutor, at the bulletin board covered with job postings and citizenship test dates and flyers for children's programs. Yeah, I think it would matter to me. Rosa extended her hand. "Let's try it."
The next month was a whirlwind of permits, vendor applications, and outreach. I kept my day job but spent every evening and weekend working on the festival. I discovered muscles I didn't know I had, not just organizational skills, but the ability to build coalitions, navigate bureaucracy, and convince skeptical business owners to take a chance on something new. The hardest part was telling Linda that I was doing. "You're organizing a competing event?" she asked when I explained the festival during our July check-in. "It's not competing. It's completely different. We're trying to raise money for a community center, not plan someone's wedding." "Ava, this is exactly the kind of thinking that's been affecting your work lately. You're so focused on helping the right people that you're forgetting the people who actually pay our bills." "What if the people paying our bills aren't the people I want to help?" The conversation escalated quickly. Linda accused me of being naive and idealistic. I accused her of being mercenary and disconnected from real community needs. We both said things we probably shouldn't have, but by the end, one thing was clear. My heart wasn't in the event planning business anymore. "Take some time to think about what you really want," Linda said as I left her office. "But I need to know by the end of August whether you're committed to this job or not." The deadline felt like a gift. By the end of August, I'd know whether the festival was a success or a disaster. I'd know whether my idea of meaningful work was realistic or just a naive fantasy. I'd know whether I had the courage to leave a secure job for something uncertain but authentic. For the first time in months, I felt like I was moving toward clarity instead of away from it. The festival was scheduled for the first weekend in September. We had commitments from 12 food vendors, 6 performance groups, and local politicians who wanted to make speeches about community and inclusion. The permits were approved and the insurance was handled, and early media coverage suggested we might actually draw a crowd. But 3 weeks before the event, I got a call that changed everything. "Ava, this is David Park from the Parks Bureau. I'm calling about your festival permit." My stomach dropped. "Is there a problem?" "We've received some complaints from established event organizers about permits being granted to inexperienced groups. There are questions about whether your organization has the proper insurance and crowd management experience for an event this size." I knew immediately what had happened. The event planning industry in Portland was small, and Linda had connections throughout the city. She'd made some phone calls. "What does this mean for our permit?" "It means we need to review your application again. The earliest we could reschedule the review would be mid-October. After the summer festival season, after the good weather, after the momentum we'd built with vendors and performers and media coverage." Sitting in my apartment that evening, staring at 3 weeks of work that might amount to nothing, I faced a choice that would define everything that came next. The permit crisis forced me into the kind of clarity that only comes when everything is on the line. I could accept the delay, reschedule for October, and probably salvage the festival while keeping my day job. Safe, reasonable, practical. Or I could fight the bureaucratic interference head-on, knowing that doing so would likely mean burning bridges with Linda and the event planning industry. I chose to fight. The next morning, I walked into Linda's office and quit. "Effective immediately?" she asked, not looking up from her computer. "Effective immediately." "You know I'll have to use my contacts to protect my business interests." "I know, but I also know that what you're doing is wrong, and I can't work for someone who would sabotage a community center fundraiser out of spite." "It's not spite, Ava. It's business. You're competing with us using skills and contacts you developed working for me. I'm helping a community center pay rent. If you see that as competition, maybe you should reconsider what business you're actually in." I'd never spoken to an employer like that in my life. Walking out of that office, I felt terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. The permit appeal process required a formal hearing in front of the Parks and Recreation Board. I had exactly 2 weeks to build a case that our small volunteer organization could safely manage a public event for potentially thousands of people. I started with research.
Portland's municipal code, insurance requirements, crowd management protocols. I spent 3 days in the city archives studying every community event permit granted in the past 5 years, looking for precedents and procedures. Then I got strategic. Rosa introduced me to Pedro Gutierrez, who ran a nonprofit advocacy organization for immigrant rights. Pedro had been fighting City Hall for a decade and knew where all the political pressure points were. The Parks Bureau is appointed by the mayor, he explained over coffee at a Honduran restaurant in the Jade District. They're sensitive to accusations of discrimination or favoritism. If this looks like established businesses using bureaucracy to shut out community organizers, that's a bad look for the city. How do I make it look like that? You document everything. You show how other events with similar profiles got approved without extra scrutiny. You bring community members to the hearing to testify about why this festival matters. You make it clear that denying this permit would be denying opportunities to immigrant vendors and performers. Pedro also connected me with Maria Santos, a city council member who represented the district where most of the festival vendors lived. Maria was running for re-election and was always looking for opportunities to demonstrate her support for immigrant communities. I can't intervene directly in the permit process, but I can make sure the right people know this issue is on my radar. The most important ally came from an unexpected source, Dr. Torres from my support group. You know, I used to work in city planning before I became a therapist, she mentioned, during our weekly group meeting when I shared what was happening. You did? 20 years in municipal government. I know everyone on the Parks Board personally. I can't tell them how to vote, but I can make sure they understand the full context of your situation. With 2 days left before the hearing, I had assembled a case file that would have made a law student proud. Permits granted to first-time organizers, insurance requirements that we'd already met, examples of successful community festivals in other cities, testimonials from vendors, performers, and community members about what the festival would mean to them. But the most powerful weapon in my arsenal turned out to be something I hadn't planned. The story had gotten picked up by local media, first the neighborhood newspaper, then the alternative weekly, then the main Portland Tribune. The narrative was irresistible. Young woman quits corporate job to help immigrant community, gets blocked by bureaucratic red tape. By the morning of the hearing, #PortlandFestival was trending on local social media, and the Parks Board meeting room was packed with supporters.
The hearing itself was surprisingly anticlimactic. Linda had hired a lawyer who made procedural arguments about permit requirements and crowd management protocols. But when Rosa stood up to speak about what the community center meant to immigrant families, when 12-year-old Sarah Kim testified about how the after-school program helped her with homework while her parents worked double shifts, when elderly Mr. Tran spoke in heavily accented English about learning citizenship rights in the center's classes, the legal arguments seemed petty and disconnected from reality. The board voted 4-1 to approve our permit. As people filed out of the meeting room, hugging and congratulating each other, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before the accident. The deep satisfaction of accomplishing something that mattered, not just to me, but to a community of people I was beginning to think of as my community. But approving the permit was just the beginning. We now had 3 weeks to execute a festival that could make or break the community center's future. I threw myself into the work with an intensity that surprised everyone, including me. 18-hour days coordinating with vendors, performers, media outlets, city services. I was using every skill I developed in event planning, but now it felt like those skills had found their proper purpose. The festival took place on the first Saturday in September, under clear skies that felt like a gift from the universe. By 10 a.m., Pioneer Courthouse Square was filling with families speaking a dozen different languages. Food trucks lined the perimeter: Vietnamese pho, Ethiopian injera, Mexican elotes, Korean barbecue, Lebanese shawarma. The stage featured a constant rotation of performances: traditional Chinese dance, mariachi music, Somali folk songs, Ukrainian violin.
I spent the day troubleshooting small crises. A food truck's generator died. A performer was running late. We ran out of volunteer t-shirts. But each problem felt solvable rather than catastrophic. This was the same kind of event management I'd been doing for months, but it felt completely different when the stakes were a community center's survival rather than a corporation's quarterly team-building goals. The breakthrough moment came around 2 p.m. when I was standing near the information booth watching families enjoy the festival. A woman approached me with a crying toddler and asked in broken English where she could find a quiet place to feed her baby. I walked her over to Rosa, who was manning the community center's booth, and watched Rosa welcome the woman in what sounded like Mandarin, then lead her to a quiet corner where other mothers were sitting with their children. Within minutes, the woman was smiling and chatting with other parents while her baby ate peacefully. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a fundraiser. We'd created a space where people could connect across language and cultural barriers, where immigrant families could feel welcomed and celebrated instead of invisible or tolerated, where the broader Portland community could experience the richness of cultures they might never encounter otherwise. This was the kind of work I dreamed about doing in social work school, bringing people together, building community connections, creating opportunities for mutual understanding and support. By 6 p.m., when we started cleaning up, we'd raised over $47,000, enough to cover the community center's rent for more than a year and fund program expansions that Rosa had only dreamed about. But more than the money, we'd proven something important, that community organizing could accomplish things that traditional charity couldn't. Instead of wealthy donors writing checks to feel good about helping the less fortunate, we'd created an event where everyone, vendors, performers, attendees, volunteers, benefited from participating. As I helped stack chairs and fold tables, Rosa approached me with an envelope. "The community center board met this afternoon. We want to offer you a job." I stared at the envelope. "A job?" "Community outreach coordinator. It's part-time to start, and the salary is, well, it's nonprofit salary. But you'd be helping organize programs, writing grants, coordinating with other community organizations, building on what you did today." The salary was less than half what I'd been making with Linda. No health insurance, no 401k, no clear career advancement path. By any practical measure, it was a step backward. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But Ava, I want you to know, today changed everything for us. Not just the money, but the proof that we can do things differently, that we can build something sustainable instead of just surviving month to month." Walking home through downtown Portland that evening, exhausted but energized, I realized I wasn't thinking about the salary or the benefits or the practical concerns that had driven so many of my decisions over the past year. I was thinking about Sarah Kim getting homework help while her parents worked double shifts, about Mr. Tran learning his rights as a new citizen, about the woman with the crying baby finding a community of other mothers who welcomed her despite language barriers. I was thinking about work that felt like purpose instead of just a paycheck.
I said yes to Rosa's offer the next Monday morning. The decision felt inevitable, like water flowing downhill toward the sea. Everything I'd learned over the past year about community organizing, about bureaucratic systems, about what actually motivated me, had led to this moment. Not the job offer itself, but the clarity to recognize that meaningful work mattered more than maximum salary. My first official day at the Jade District Community Center was October 1st. I showed up early to an empty building, made coffee in the tiny kitchen, and sat at my secondhand desk looking at a to-do list that seemed simultaneously overwhelming and energizing. The festival's success had created new opportunities and new challenges. We had enough money to expand programming, but we needed to hire staff, develop curricula, and establish partnerships with other organizations. The media attention had brought new volunteers, but also new expectations from funders and city officials who suddenly saw us as a model for community development. Rosa handed me my first major project, developing a comprehensive job training program for recent immigrants. The idea was ambitious, partnering with local employers to create pathway programs that would help people transition from survival jobs to career track positions. The construction industry is desperate for workers, she explained during our planning meeting. Healthcare facilities need more bilingual staff. Small businesses want employees who understand different cultural communities. We just need to create bridges. It sounded simple in theory. In practice, it meant navigating complex relationships between immigrant communities who often distrusted institutions, employers who had preconceptions about language barriers and work authorization, and training programs that weren't designed for people balancing multiple jobs and family responsibilities. My first breakthrough came through an unexpected connection. Mrs. Chen had mentioned that her son-in-law, Robert Kim, owned a mid-sized construction company that specialized in green building renovations. When I called him about the job training program, he was immediately interested. "We can't find enough skilled workers," he told me during our meeting at his office in the industrial district. "Everyone's fighting over the same pool of experienced contractors, but we could train people if we had a reliable pipeline of motivated candidates." Robert agreed to pilot a program where the community center would provide basic construction training, safety protocols, tool usage, communication skills, while his company offered paid apprenticeships to program graduates. Participants would earn while they learned, and Robert would get first access to workers who'd already demonstrated commitment and reliability. The pilot program launched in November with 12 participants. Recent immigrants from Somalia, Guatemala, Vietnam, and Ukraine who were currently working in restaurants, warehouses, and cleaning services, but wanted to transition to higher-paying trades. I spent my days coordinating between the participants, the training instructors, and Robert's project managers. More importantly, I spent time understanding the real barriers people faced: childcare during training hours, transportation to job sites, navigating workplace cultures that might be unfamiliar or unwelcoming. The work was harder than anything I'd done in event planning, but it was also more rewarding than anything I'd ever imagined. When Miguel Santos, a former restaurant worker from Guatemala, got his first full-time construction job with benefits, he brought his entire family to the community center to thank everyone who'd helped him. When Fatima Ahmed started earning enough money to move her family out of subsidized housing, she hugged me so tightly I thought she might crack my ribs. But the real transformation wasn't just in the program participants, it was in me. For the first time in my adult life, I was doing work that felt completely aligned with who I was and what I believed. The skills I'd developed in event planning, project management, stakeholder coordination, crisis resolution were directly applicable, but now they served a purpose that energized rather than depleted me. More importantly, I was learning skills I'd never had the chance to develop: grant writing, community organizing, policy advocacy, program evaluation. Every day brought new challenges that stretched me in directions I hadn't known I wanted to grow. In February, I got a call that would open another door entirely. "Ava, this is Dr. Chen from the University of Portland MSW program. I remember you visited us last year about our social work program."
My heart jumped. Yes, I remember our conversation. I've been following the work you've been doing with the Jade District Community Center, the festival, the job training program, the media coverage about your community organizing approach. I'm calling because we've had a last-minute opening in our graduate program for this fall. She explained that a student had withdrawn from the program, creating space for a new admission. More importantly, the university had received a federal grant to fund graduate education for students working in community development roles. Essentially, we could offer you a full scholarship plus a small living stipend in exchange for continuing your work at the community center while completing your degree. It's a new pilot program that combines academic learning with real-world community practice.
The offer was everything I'd wanted a year ago: graduate education, financial support, and the chance to formalize my transition into social work. But now, instead of feeling desperate for the opportunity, I felt curious about whether it would enhance the work I was already doing. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course, but I should mention the application deadline is in 2 weeks." That evening, I called Dr. Torres to talk through the decision. Our weekly support group had become less about crisis management and more about life transitions, but she remained one of my most trusted advisors. "A year ago, you would have said yes immediately," she observed. "A year ago, I thought I needed someone else's program to do meaningful work. Now, I'm not sure graduate school would add anything to what I'm already learning." "What would it add?" I considered the question. Formal training in policy analysis, research methods, maybe connections with other community organizers, access to resources and research I couldn't get otherwise. And what would it cost? Time away from direct service work, academic requirements that might not align with community needs, the risk of getting caught up in theoretical frameworks instead of practical solutions. Sounds like you're thinking about this very differently than you would have last year. She was right. A year ago, I'd seen graduate school as a necessary credential for doing the work I wanted to do. Now I was doing the work and evaluating whether graduate school would enhance it or distract from it. I decided to apply, but with a different mindset. Instead of seeing the MSW as a requirement for legitimacy, I approached it as a potential tool for expanding my impact. The application process itself became a form of reflection. Writing my personal statement forced me to articulate how much I'd changed since that terrible day when I found my belongings in trash bags on Marcus's porch. 18 months ago, I wrote, I thought my life was falling apart. I was recovering from a serious accident, my engagement had ended, and all my carefully laid plans had been abandoned. I felt like a victim of circumstances beyond my control. Today, I understand that what felt like destruction was actually liberation. The accident taught me resilience. The broken engagement taught me that relationships built on convenience rather than genuine partnership are fragile foundations for life decisions. The disrupted plans taught me that authentic purpose is more sustainable than borrowed dreams. Most importantly, the past year has taught me that meaningful work isn't just about helping individuals, it's about changing systems that create barriers to human flourishing. Through community organizing, I've learned that lasting change happens when people work together to build solutions, rather than waiting for institutions to solve their problems. I got accepted to the program in April. More importantly, the Community Center Board voted to support my participation, recognizing that the additional training would benefit our expanding programs. But the real culmination came in May at our second annual Multicultural Festival. This time, we had city support from the beginning. 3 times as many vendors, performance stages in 2 locations, educational workshops on citizenship, small business development, and financial literacy, a children's area with activities in multiple languages. Standing in Pioneer Courthouse Square on Festival Day, watching thousands of people celebrate the diversity and resilience of Portland's immigrant communities, I felt something I'd never experienced before, the deep satisfaction of work that had grown into mission. Sarah found me near the main stage, where a group of teenagers were performing traditional Mexican folk dances. "Remember 2 years ago when you thought your life was over?" she asked, handing me a cup of horchata from one of the vendors. "Honestly, it feels like that happened to a different person." In a way it did. The Ava who was planning to marry Marcus and work as a hospital nurse was a different person than the one who just got into graduate school while running community development programs. I watched the dancers spin in their colorful dresses, listened to families speaking a dozen different languages, saw children playing together regardless of where their parents had come from. This festival had grown beyond fundraising into something more important, a demonstration that community is built through intentional inclusion rather than accidental proximity. Later that evening, after we'd finished cleaning up and counting money and celebrating another successful event, I drove home through the city I'd come to love in entirely new ways. past the community center where I'd learned that meaningful work requires more courage than skill, past the apartment where I'd figured out who I was when no one else's expectations were shaping my choices, past the support group meeting room where I'd learned that transitions are opportunities for becoming rather than just getting through. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, the first communication we'd had since that drunk phone call almost 2 years ago. Saw the news coverage of your festival. Looks amazing. Hope you're well. I stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. Some chapters of life deserve to stay closed so that new ones can be written with complete attention to what comes next. And what came next, I was discovering, was better than anything I could have planned.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.